What secret did you learn about someone after many years of friendship? When my best friend died, I learned that I never knew her at all. She was a pathological liar. She had told me that she was born in New Zealand and moved to the US when she was 2. No, born and raised in NJ. She told me her middle name was different than on her obituary. The craziest lie was that she had a younger sister that was hit by a car as a toddler and died. She had a tattoo of roses that she swore was for her little sister. There was a specific day in November every year where she'd fall apart crying. Said it was her sister's date of death. That sister never existed. Sounds like someone who would fake up an obituary too.
Are you sure she is even dead?
She is 1000% lurking here.
That's crazy.
I know that made you never trust people again. Fun side note, we got matching trust no bitch tattoos. Really should have been taking the tattoos advice. Foreshadowing was written on the wall. Or the arm, as the case may be. That happened to me before too, but not that bad. I found out that my former best friend was lying to me about everything. She told me that she got laid off from her job because it was during COVID. So I lent her $200. Come to find out, she had been fired from the bank for fudging numbers. She also lied to me about why her and her ex-boyfriend split up. She told me that she had no relatives in our state, so her friends were the only family she had. Found out later that she has a mom, aunt and a grandma here. The worst part was that her and I used to work together at one time. She also got fired from that job. When she was terminated, she told HR a whole bunch of lies and got me involved. I was on a team in high school for 4 years, got pretty close with the other girls on the team, and we all hung out all of the time. We decided to go bowling together, and one of these girls, who we had spent hours a week with for years and talked about everything under the sun with, showed up with her own shoes, gloves, bag, and bowling ball and crushed us all with a near-professional score. She had never mentioned bowling to any of us, even once, even when we were making plans to go bowling. I scrolled this far for a fun positive one. My ex-BF had a close friend who we weren't all aware had been a competition league bowler at one point. I wasn't there for this, but my ex and his buddies went to a local bowling alley for beer and to play a game one night. Their buddy got loosey-goosey and began busting out some of his bowling tricks, and it caused a small crowd to come watch. This girl in the crowd pushed him aside and began outdoing all of his tricks. If he did a spin and shot the ball between his legs, she'd do 2 spins and shoot the ball between her legs backwards, that sort of thing. Yeah, they've been married for almost a decade now. I worked summers as a ticket booth operator at a minor league baseball stadium for around 3 years. The owner was this really nice old guy, mid to late 80s, who always showed up in a wheelchair being walked by his daughter. He always rewarded his employees with bonuses for good work. He even gave me $300 once for helping cash out one of his close childhood friends. One of the final games I worked there, he called me into his owner's box and gave me beer and free food as well as $1,500, just to thank me for all the hard work I did for him over the years. He told me the reason he liked me so much was because I didn't pretend to like him because of who he was. Confused, I asked him to clarify. And he asked me if I seriously didn't know. I was still confused, and then he told me the truth. He was actually a Hall of Fame pitcher who played with the Cleveland Indians and Philadelphia A's from the 1940s, early 1960s, and even served in WW2. And showed me a replica of his Hall of Fame plaque. We laughed about it, and he further insinuated why he liked me so much. He passed away around a year after this, and I attended his funeral. All around an amazing dude, and I feel like such an idiot for not knowing who he was. What was his name? Might have gotten the teams wrong. Most likely candidate is early win. Guess his late win now. I learned my husband was attracted to children after knowing him 8 years, shortly after our 6th wedding anniversary. I found a video one day and our marriage dissolved in an instant. I contacted police and cooperated fully with the police. He's in prison now. Have you watched the new Hulu docu-series Betrayal, The Perfect Husband? You are not alone. So sorry for you. Wow. I haven't, but I will. Over the last few years I have encountered too many women who have dealt with similar situations. I hate to see someone join this club, but I am so proud to see a generation of women that are not willing to stand by bad men who prey on innocence and trust. Find that out must have been absolutely terrible, but you did the 100% correct thing. I was incredibly incensed that he thought he had the slightest chance of me not turning him in, when I found out. Our relationship ended so quickly, and I didn't even think about it for more than 2 years, that I had lost my husband because I was so focused on the children and the criminal process and keeping the kids around me safe. It turned my life upside down. My husband was the sole financial support of our family, and he very quickly locked me out of everything. Thankfully my community, Reddit too, and my family were more than willing to help us bridge the gap until I could get income coming in. His family told me that if I had financial concerns I should have thought about that before I betrayed my husband. They refused to offer any support even to clothe or feed their grandchild. We've got no contact with his whole family at this point because they're just all insane. They really minimize his actions and feel like the only one that's even slightly entitled to be hurt is his direct victim. Though they minimize the predatory aspect of it and blame a 14-year-old for being developed like a woman or wearing shorts or a swimsuit in the summer. I really did come close to killing him, but I had to think about our child and the other kids involved, and I couldn't take myself away from them, especially my daughter. I grew up knowing what it felt like to be left behind. Mom died when I was 13, and I just couldn't be the cause of her having no parents. Even if I got off for temporary insanity or anything like that, the amount of stress it would have caused my daughter was not worth it. So I took the high road and contacted police and did everything they asked of me during the investigation. This included identifying the persons in a lot of pictures and videos. I don't know that I'll ever recover from that. Seeing the images of what he did is something I will never get out of my mind. I felt like I violated her again by having to look at those. His family has the nerve to enable him and say things like, "We've never seen the evidence, so why would we just believe what other people say?" It blows my mind. No one should want to see that evidence. I've never seen so many people try to make something like this okay and victim and witness blame on the level that happened in this situation. No regrets. I'm glad I cut that cancer out of my family before his behavior escalated. My niece is finishing college this year and is absolutely beautiful inside and out. She lives 1,000 miles away, so she didn't really have to deal with the day-to-day criminal process and was able to start healing pretty quickly. She even went on a popular podcast at her college on the subject of trauma. I listened to that podcast probably 100 times. She never even mentions him, says she refuses to let him have any power by existing in her head at all. It helps me remember that he didn't break her, so he can't break me. I found out that one of my best friends used to be a competitive figure skater. We'd been friends for years and she never mentioned it. One day, we were talking about childhood hobbies and she casually mentioned she used to compete at a national level. I was shocked. She even showed me some old photos and videos. It was so cool to see a completely different side of her. Someone I dated years ago, it was the same. She was ranked in the top 5 figure skaters nationally when she was younger. I didn't find out until we visited her parents' house and I saw rows of medals and trophies. Old neighbor was a decent guy. Good with the kids, a Papa John to my kids. We moved after about 5 years of knowing him. I knew he had been in prison, not a big deal, we all have a past. Turns out he was there for raping an 11-year-old who he got pregnant. He has since vanished and nobody knows where he is. Not my life, but my best friend had a next-door neighbor for years and BBQD and hung out all the time. The neighbor's wife had a severe stroke and was significantly dependent on in-home care. The neighbors all pitched in and kids would help him with cleaning and yard work. Until he was arrested for attempting to molest them, and his wife had no cognitive ability to understand why her husband went away. That's just sad. Found out that a longtime golf buddy of mine was a professional ballroom dance teacher in his previous years. Guy is 300+ pounds and just didn't give off ballroom dancer vibes. My wife of 10 years used to work for Arthur Murray Dance Schools and didn't believe he knew how to dance, so she invited him and his wife over for dinner. Boy, was she wrong. Golf buddy twirled her, dipped her, the whole 9 yards, as both myself and his wife stood there with our jaws on the floor. After going through 7 different dances with my wife, he twirled her one last time towards me and said, "Told you so." We had a great dinner and I learned something new about the 300-pound Samoan that I golf with every weekend. I love watching really obese people ballroom dance. There's just something about seeing a body so large move with so much grace and agility. You don't expect it, and so every move they make is a big surprise. That the man she claimed was harassing her actually took a restraining order out against her because she'd been the one stalking him the entire time. This was going on for years. He had video proof. It was unsettling to think of how easily she lied for years and years to so many of us. Oh my God, you just reminded me of one. My old flatmate and her fiancé broke up and she came back from break a week early. She gave this whole sob story about him misunderstanding a phone call he eavesdropped on and kicking her out. 2 days later a guy shows up at our apartment and they spend a few hours talking quietly. I asked her the next morning and she said a guy from a class the previous semester was obsessed with her, saw she was single on FB, remembered where she lived from a study group she hosted and came to ask her out. Turns out she was cheating on her fiancé with him, and when she got caught she ended things to save face. She told everyone that he was some crazy vet with PTSD that was stalking her. Meanwhile she had been seeing him on the side while her fiancé paid her tuition. For weeks later, before I found this out, she asked me if we could watch her friend's cat for a month. It was his. She tried to get me to lie to her new BF about the cat thing when I finally found out. The only reason I know that she lied was her ex-fiancé sent screen caps of the cheating to her FB contacts, but we weren't friends, so it went to spam until I realized I had a spam folder. She seemed like the nicest person, but was a whole chaotic mess. Not so much a secret, but news to me. My roommate and I were in the USMC together, and if you aren't married then you must maintain a barracks room. Most people take that as meaning you have to live in the barracks, but if you show up to field day and keep your room clean you can't technically get in trouble if you decide you don't want to stay there all the time. My buddy was married at the time so he had his own house off base, and after getting tired of the barracks life I started staying at his house more and more, helping out and whatnot. We were definitely friends, always had each other's backs and had similar humor, really growing close, getting into each other's hobbies. Well, one day almost out of the blue his wife leaves him to find herself, which is pretty fucked as they had a child together. So, Buddy is now single and back in the barracks almost ready to EAS, basically get out of the USMC, so he lets his now ex-wife have custody for a few months back in their home state so he can get his shit together to presumably work out a custody deal. Nothing too notable happens, we have a sending off party for him and he heads back home. I spend another like 6 months to maybe a year still in. I'm pretty shitty when it comes to keeping in touch with people, so I figure he probably feels a little betrayed I didn't reach out a whole lot during that time. I get out and move in with my parents. I saved quite a bit of money not having a car, mostly living in the barracks and eating at the chow hall, so I take a year off. Spent time with my family, didn't have any friends really, when my buddy starts reaching out. Every few months or so he'd say stuff like, there's a really good job here, you wouldn't have to rent a place, you could stay with me, I could stay there rent-free if I looked after his kid. At this point he had him every other week, another job opportunity, you should just visit so we can hang out or whatever. I finally think to myself, why not? It seems to me he's either lonely or trying to look out for me, so fly out see his house and boom, pandemic shuts down airports and shit and I don't have a car. So, basically become a live-in nanny, but it's not so bad, we're having fun and have each other's backs again. One day, we get completely shit-wrecked drunk, happens sometimes, but he tells me something that just shocked me, I am the main benefactor of his will. Here I am thinking we're just good friends, and dude's like, no, you have the responsibility of making sure that whatever I have is used to help my son live a good life. Damn, that hit me right in the feels. For a second there I thought you were going to tell us you two now run a bed and breakfast with your beautiful children or something like that. Lovely story by the way. Me, too. I thought Brokeback Barracks is coming. All kidding aside, good for you, OP, for being a rock in his life. He knew American Sign Language. Knew the guy for a few years, just a regular guy. One day, I met him for breakfast to find him deep in conversation with a deaf dude. Tried to say hi but couldn't get a hand in edgewise. It wasn't really a secret, so I don't know if it qualifies. But I have a work friend, we've known each other for years. Grab beers together, hang outside of work from time to time. Turns out we've been in each other's orbit since birth. He mentioned his mom knowing someone I knew via my mom. We started going through contacts. We'd attended the same schools, just different classes that never blended. His brother dated my cousin's best friend. We'd worked for the same companies, just a mix of one of coming in as the other was leaving, or the company was big enough for paths to never cross. We'd lived in the same neighborhoods multiple times. We had the same favorite restaurant in one place, we just had different regular days to go. A lot of people talk about past lives and soulmates. I don't think it always has to be romantic, but there are definitely some people who are meant to be in your life, and those are the relationships you should treasure. They have a lisp. No bullshitting, I never noticed the lisp until my wife met him and pointed it out, and bam, I noticed the lisp now. Son of a bitch slipped it by me.
Flipped it by you?
Too soon. A good friend of mine that I'd known over 20 years died in 2021 from COVID. I noticed a bunch of children at the funeral that I didn't know. I asked who they were, and I was told that they were his children. He told me he had no kids, but actually had 10. 10 kids. My grandfather was always jumpy around thunderstorms. We assumed it was because he was shot down during the war, and it sounded like anti-aircraft fire. Nope. Turns out, when he was a teenager, he got struck by lightning. The craziest part was, this happened the day before he started dating my grandmother. And she'd never heard that story. Had a guy I worked with for a couple of years that became the lead singer of my best friend's band. They practiced in my garage, meaning he was in my home on the regular. I'd gotten drunk with this dude more times than I can count, collaborated on work projects even when I moved on, and generally considered him a colleague, mentor, and friend. Then he was arrested and sent to prison for raping his 15-year-old stepdaughter, and it had been happening for years. To include when he was a frequent guest in my home. I'm 56 now, but at some point in my early 40s while driving with my dad he says, "You have a half-brother somewhere." Heh. I'm somebody's dirty secret. Pretty certain I have at least a younger half-brother out there, because I've been mistaken for him. Back in college a few friends encountered my doppelganger a few times, said he was identical to me, but an asshole. They couldn't tell it wasn't me until they talked to him. I was mistaken for him, too. Had a couple young women come up to me in a bar, start freaking out on me for cheating on my girlfriend and being such an asshole. It took showing them ID, and my friends vouching for me to get them to leave me alone. Here's the thing, I'm adopted. Dude had the same last name I was born with. So, not impossible, right? A childhood best friend of mine had a mother who constantly went on vacations alone to Florida. Turns out she was actually in the psych ward. I had a very close friend growing up from a big family. He was the oldest brother out of 6 kids. I never saw anything wrong, but definitely remember some weird vibes during sleepovers. We lost contact after high school, but during the pandemic reconnected. His family was having a barbecue one day, and I'm sitting with him in his car hanging out smoking and listening to music. One of his sisters came to the window and made a really overtly sexual joke to him, and he looked over at me like he was seeing if I heard it. He said something like, "You're nasty, get the fuck away from me," and she said, "That never stopped you before." I started therapy a while ago and confided in a friend about my CSA. She confided she has also been sad, and it was her by her brother. Plus he had been living in a house owned by their mom, refusing to pay rent or let her inside, and they had been dealing with legal issues around it for years. They had just gotten him out of the house and out of their lives. I was floored. I had no idea she had been going through any of this. The things people struggle through, and you would never know, because there is so much silence and shame around it. This is someone I'm close to. I respect her strength even more now. That he couldn't hold a conversation about something he wasn't personally interested in. He'd just nod his head and wait to change the subject. She had been raped by a mutual acquaintance while attending a party at his house. His wife was upstairs at the time and apparently didn't realize it. Fast forward about 25 years, and he's since been divorced, remarried, and his second wife died of cancer. He messaged her the day after his second wife died to hit on her. My multi-year FWB and I had many deep conversations, and I thought I knew her pretty well, so when I found out she was a married politician from a neighboring state, I was surprised. Not exactly a secret or something not shared, but twice now I've learned a male friend I assumed was straight was bisexual. Both cases I went, "Oh cool, that's new info," and never brought it up again. Men tend to not talk about relationships at all unless asked to. My straight male friend recently opened up to me about having been sexually assaulted when he was like 19. Told me he'd never told anyone else what happened. I wish men had more of an avenue to discuss that kind of thing when it happens to them. I'm certain the only reason he told me is because I was recently raped and asked if I could talk to him about it. In my youth, I learned my friend of 6 or 7 years was a Jehovah's Witness. I had no idea. Sitting there talking to him one day, and I asked him if he was ready for Christmas and he said no, and that's when he told me he was Jehovah's Witness. I had no idea. Later, I found out that he was the reason why every time the Jehovah's Witnesses went up and down the street in our neighborhood they always skipped my house. His middle name was Marine. Homophobe like dick in every hole of his body where it fits.